It's been a while. Nothing came to my mind to talk about in the last week or so, which is good. You know, if there's nothing to say, don't say it. I think, you know, sometimes in church meetings and whatnot, we feel like we have this if we're asked to speak, we have this time slot, you know, and I think sometimes you just have to. Every time you should just go by the Spirit and say what the Spirit dictates, and then end it. That's been my philosophy. And if nothing's coming to mind, you know, I guess there's the phrase "fake it till you make it." But when it comes to speaking, or when it comes to things like this, I've tried not to force anything, or to just, you know, put out a video to put out a video. And I know sometimes it probably feels that way, but I promise you I do everything to avoid that. If there's nothing, then there's nothing. And quite often, you know, going back the over 2 years I've been doing this now, there's periods of time when I just don't do any videos, and that, now you know why. It's not because generally that I'm too busy or this or that. It's just because there's just nothing there. There's nothing there for me that I feel impressed to share. I had, and I've talked about this before, I had this kind of you know, where you're half asleep and half awake, and there's thoughts and things. I get those occasionally. And this one, the poem by Robert Frost, was just embedded in my head. And it's there's two famous ones that and you all know these, but the one is stopping by the woods on a snowy evening. Whose woods these are, right? And I'm going to read it. And that was just going through. I don't have it memorized perfectly, but I know the story. And so I thought, well, okay, I'm going to do a video on that, and I'm going to see what happens as I talk about it. So very little preparation. I've read it through once, and I just want to see what we have here. So Robert Frost, I don't know, I looked up his biography, but I can't remember it too well. But I think born in the later 1800s, and educated at Harvard, I think Dartmouth as well. And but this poem, I've always loved it, and you've always loved it. I know that. Okay, Robert Frost. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near. Between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. There's so much into this. First off, this is the wrong time of year to be saying this. It should be at the winter solstice, in my opinion. I think that's the darkest night, perhaps, that he's referring to. Could be a personal thing. It could be he's... I don't know if I want to say the word depressed, or in a depression, or a mourning, but whatever it is, he's very reflective. He recognizes he's probably trespassing. And remember what the video I did with Vladimir, and I was trespassing on his property. I think that was in the back of my mind when I started thinking about this, because he knows that he's on someone else's property. He also knows that the guy's not there to see him. You know, just the thought that comes to my mind, aren't we all just somewhat strangers everywhere we go? even in our own homes. Sometimes we feel like we're strangers, strangers in a strange land, right? Just depending on how things are going in our lives. And I love the connection he has with his horse in this, because he senses that the horse is like, why are we stopping here? I'm an animal that gets us from point A to point B, not an animal that views the trees and the snow, the quietness. And he talks about the bells ringing. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. So you can tell he's deep in thought, this person, because he's feeling what the horse is feeling. He's feeling what the owner of the property might be suspecting. He's feeling his own, okay, I'm trespassing, but I just can't help but see these beautiful woods. And why was he there? The horse was wondering why he was there. And why was he there? My guess is to say a prayer, to commune with God. But I have promises to keep. That's where he had his answer to his prayer, in my opinion. And miles to go before I sleep. I got a lot to do still. And it's time to move on, and it's time to move forward. I love this poem. And I think there is so much that we can all get out of it, depending on what stage we're in our lives, or age-wise, or family-wise, or occupation, whatever it is. I think some of these, like, why would that poem become so famous? Because it touches on so many different aspects of our lives. Feeling out of place, trespassing, if you will, seeing the beauty of nature, being at the dark, what does he say? The darkest evening of the year. No moon, I don't know. But I love that. Now, I didn't have this other poem in my head, but I've got to read it because it's our other favorite Robert Frost poem, The Two Roads, or The Road Not Taken, which is an interesting title to this when you read it, The Road Not Taken. It's almost a focus on the road he didn't take versus the road that he did take. But let's read it. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. And be one traveler, long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took another, as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as for that the passing there had worn them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay, in leaves no step had trodden back. Oh, I kept the first for another day. And there's an exclamation point there, by the way. Yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I could ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that made all the difference. We can relate to this. If we're followers of Christ, not perfect, but if we're followers of Christ, quite often we find ourselves going the road less traveled. And it makes all the difference. It makes all the difference in the world. I love those two poems. I know they're favorites of all, if not most of you. But there's a lot of our scriptures are in a poetic form, and they're usually the ones that we relate to the most. There's just something about it. I am not a poet. I don't go to coffee shops and listen to poetry. I'm saying that maybe I should. I just don't. I'm not there yet. But I do find, as I study the scriptures, I think I understand poetry more. Not necessarily, what the poet's trying to say, but what the poem is speaking to me about. It's very similar to reading scripture, and everybody can get their, the general thing, which is what the scriptures do, give you the general either history or a covenant or a description, a story. But then there's the personal revelation that you receive when you study the scripture. Poems are the same way. In my opinion, that the more you read them and study them, the more insights that you get, and personal ones. So, hey, I shared some poetry. The other thing I wanted to talk about is just a little bit of the Come Follow Me. We finished Genesis this week, and I'm kind of sad. I love Genesis for so many different reasons, as I know you do. I wanted to focus a little bit on the blessing to Judah by Jacob or Israel. I also wanted to talk a little bit about, and I'll read that in a second, but just while I'm thinking about it, it's so interesting how, the famine that was so sore, and the household of Jacob, the household of Israel would have perished, most certainly, if it hadn't have been for Joseph. And if it hadn't have been for Joseph's brothers selling him to the caravan. And Joseph acknowledged that twice in our reading. I'm not going to find it for you. You can find it. But twice he said, this all happened for a reason. And all the heartache, all the things I went through, I see God's plan. And if they hadn't have done that to me, I wouldn't have been in the position to save them, but really my dad's legacy and the covenant through the 12 tribes, 12 sons. And then he says it again, twice in that reading that we had this week. Joseph acknowledges the goodness of his trials, horrible trials, but that he saved the Abrahamic covenant through his father by feeding his father and his family, his brothers. So that's awesome. Now, we've talked already about Judah saying, you're not taking Benjamin. You're going to kill me before you kill Benjamin. And isn't that what caused Joseph to reveal who he really was? When he saw what his brother was willing to do for his younger brother. It's very tender. And I think not only did Judah have a softer heart and saw a bigger picture, but he loved his father and did not want to see his father suffer. And he said, my father said he'll die if Benjamin doesn't come back. So we see this side, but then we see even more through the blessing that Israel gives to Judah. And I'm going to read that. And it's just so a foreshadowing. So here am I, take me. This is a foreshadowing of the Messiah coming through the lineage of Judah. So here's, one other thing. Sorry. It was so important, even though then Jacob, Israel, blesses Pharaoh. I think that would have been so cool to see, and to see Pharaoh go, gosh, this is kind of cool to get a blessing from a prophet of the God of Israel. How cool is that? And then Jacob dies in Egypt, but says, please, and they embalm him, take my body back, take it to Hebron, or modern day Hebron, and take it back so I can be with my fathers. And he's already buried his wife Leah there. And he said, I want to be with her, which is so interesting because he doesn't really mention Rachel, does he? Doesn't mention her here, but he mentions Leah being buried there. So there's got to be an importance. As I get older, I think, maybe there is some significance as to where you're buried or your remains are. I don't know. It was definitely significant to them. And then Joseph says the same thing. In fact, make sure you read the appendix, in the appendix, the Joseph Smith translation of Genesis 50, verses 24 through 38. Gives you great insight. I know there was one LDS individual who was talking about Egypt and the mummy of Joseph, and through Akhenaten and came, and that showed a picture, and this is probably Joseph, but Joseph requested that his remains be taken to that same place, or at least back to Canaan, not the same place, but back to Canaan. So the land of Canaan. So I don't think that we know that there's a mummy in Egypt that's the mummy of Joseph. The scriptures don't go along with that. Here's the blessing that Israel gave to Judah. This is Genesis 49, verse 8. Judah, thou art he who thy brethren shall praise. Thy hand shall be in the neck of thine enemies. Thy father's children shall bow down before thee. Wow. Judah is a lion's whelp. Okay? This is all Messianic stuff. From the prey, my son, thou art gone up. He stooped down, he couched as a lion. How they sit back on their haunches. And as an old lion, who shall rouse him up? The scepter shall not depart from Judah. Boom, boom, boom. Huge verse there. The scepter, that's royalty, that's the king has his scepter. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh come, and unto him shall the gathering of the people be. The gathering, back to the promised land. Like I say, and you can compare, Zechariah 9:9, and there's a ton of other scriptures that point to this. So this is a real another messianic pointing towards Christ scripture in the Old Testament and in Genesis, which is really awesome. Then it goes through and talks about the other tribes, and then we have the hands going, and Ephraim gets the blessing before his older brother Manasseh, and you'll be a great nation, and which was totally came to pass, because once they came back under Moses, Joshua, to to the promised land, to the land of Canaan, eventually Ephraim became the largest of the tribes. And they got scattered amongst every people, basically, when they rebelled and when they basically made a deal with the devil. I shouldn't say the devil, but Assyria, and worshiped their gods, and did all that and mingled and mixed, and then they got scattered, and Ephraim was the largest tribe at the time. So that prophecy was fulfilled. It's interesting when you talk about tribes, and we've talked about the 10 tribes, the lost 10 tribes, or the 10 lost tribes, and when we say we're from Ephraim, well, we're one of the lost tribes. And so this miraculous gathering and return of the 10 tribes, I know there's a lot of smart guys out there and women who differ in my view. And I'm, you know what, if I'm found out to be wrong, so be it. But I think these scriptures really give us, especially in Genesis, and then in Exodus, we'll really get an understanding of these different tribes and different groups. And as it continues on, and particularly Numbers, we'll get this understanding that these were real people, real groups. And the tribe of Levi was mixed amongst them to do the priestly duties, and that there was a real scattering, and the tribe of Ephraim was part of that. I also understand and we've talked about this, but the Article of Faith, number 10, where it says we believe in the literal gathering of Israel and the return of the lost tribes, or the lost 10 tribes, or the 10 lost tribes. And so that those are two separate events. And I mentioned this before, but I think it's worth mentioning again. Perhaps the meaning of that is gathering is one step, and then returning is another step, because you can't return to the covenant until you've been gathered, until your information, until I think a lot of this has to do with beyond the veil, on the other side of the veil. Obviously this side through missionary work, but returning to the covenant, there's a process of gathering in order for you to return, or an individual to return. So that's why I think that it's broke up in those two things. And so the gathering through family history and all the things, and it's miraculous how we can, use a device and just boom, we're there. And all the old way of doing that research and stuff, it's the technology has blown that all away in such a miraculous way. We couldn't even have imagined how this could happen. And millions of people have been gathered and have returned because of that. So that there's a lot of that in our reading. I'm looking, and even though we're passing through Genesis and on to Exodus, it's really, really interesting to see how the blessing to each one of these sons was fulfilled through their ancestors and as they entered into the land of Canaan. Now, just one other thing. I sent for it's called Artza, A-R-T-Z-A, I think. Artza, A-R-T-Z-A. It's a subscription, and 4 times a year you get a box from Israel, and some part of Israel, a theme. And the last one was from the Golan Heights, and it was so cool. And I got it for Sue for Christmas, for Christmas. So she got a Christmas box, and all nativity and, you know, Bethlehem and all that kind of stuff. It was awesome. And then this was from the Golan Heights, which is really in dispute right now, with right next to Syria. And we've had a few Russian officials say, yeah, we don't recognize the Golan Heights as part of Israel. It's Syria, which is very concerning, but, you know, we'll see what happens there. But in this particular box, so all the things you get, I found out about this on Eric Steckelbeck's The Watchman, and he, it was an advertisement on that. I thought, oh, that'd be kind of cool. But here's, in this latest box is this lamp, oil lamp. And it came with 2 wicks. And then the real key is the spare vessel for the oil. This is I've shown you another oil lamp that I got, and they're either shaped like this or they're more oval, not as round as this, they're more oval, but about the same size. And this would be the extra oil. So this is what the 10 virgins, the parable of the 10 virgins, this was totally about. So the 5 foolish ones had this and had oil, but they didn't have this to keep that light burning, to add the oil. And the wicks, remember, the wicks need to be trimmed. These aren't trimmed. See how flat they are? You want a nice curved and smooth, and that flame goes higher. The flame goes higher, gives you more light if the wick is trimmed. So the wick would go in and be soaked with oil and then come out there, and you would have your wick here and your oil placed in there. So I thought you'd like to see those 2 things. They're not very big, and a whole wonderful parable based on these 2 items. And really, the evidence that the emphasis really is on this versus this. They all 10 of them had these. Only 5 had this, full of oil, right? The oil of conversion, as Elder Bednar would say, the oil of conversion. So I think that's it. I do want to mention one last thing. This is good stuff. Cardio Miracle. Now, my good friend John Hewlett he shared this with me. He's the owner of the company, and before I was having ankle surgery over a year ago, he found out about my situation, and he said, let me give you some of this. So he gave me some, and he goes, take it a couple of times a day before your surgery and after your surgery, let's see. And I'm telling you, I'm a believer in this stuff. And I'm hoping, because YouTube has cut me off of any making anything on these videos, that I can get a few sponsors. And Cardio Miracle, John Hewlett has said that we could work something out that way. So he's actually sponsoring this, Cardio Miracle. Now, you can go on, and I'll put a link in there in my comments. I'll put the link in my comments and I'll pin it, so it'll be the first comment. But it's www.cardiomiracle.com. It's nitric oxide that just, I don't know exactly what it does, but there's a lot of online stuff, but it gets oxygen into your blood. There's a healing, and there's so many other components to this. You could, if you're a supplement guy like I am, you can literally do away with, I would say, 2/3 of your other supplements. And there's some really good information online that can help you negotiate that, which ones you could eliminate with just using this. So I'll put that website in there. Another thing John's done is that if you put in cows, COWS, in the little boxes you check out, you'll get a discount, pretty good discount. This is great stuff, Cardio Miracle. As we get older, we need a little edge. And I found it here with Cardio Miracle. So give it a shot, give it a try, and see if it doesn't do what my testimony of it. It's great stuff. So God bless. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. We're approaching General Conference. It'll be interesting. I hear that they're going to allow, I think it's like 10,000 people, so it's like half. So I'm thinking maybe they'll sit every other seat. Masks are optional. Many temples are doing away with mask mandates. They're optional, which is a huge blessing, huge blessing. Hopefully things will continue that way. We're just going to keep working through all this, aren't we? We're just going to keep working through it all. I haven't mentioned anything about Ukraine and Russia, but just, look at other sources of information. They're out there. You might have to go to Rumble, because pretty much anything on YouTube or mainstream media is the one piano key being hit, bam, 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 bam. And, I would just suggest, looking around. I'll talk about some other things in the future of what I'm doing, and other platforms that I'm working on. One other platform I'm working on. So that'll be kind of fun. But thank you for the conversations we have. The comment section to me is my favorite. I was a little disappointed that there weren't more comments, not so much towards me, but just a conversation on my last video, because I think there's some goodness that comes from the conversations within the conversations that really have nothing to do with me, other than maybe facilitating a spot. But I love to see, that there's 6 or 8 internal comments on one comment by somebody that, I may or may not ever read those, but I think those are good. So I hope this one might generate a little bit more of that. Okay? You guys are wonderful. You're awesome. I know that God loves you. I know He loves me. And I love you. I do. This is a big part of my life now, sharing my testimony, sharing my thoughts and feelings. The more I read the scriptures in the Old Testament, the more I think of Joseph Smith for some reason. And I think of him gaining these understandings of the scriptures and who he was and is. When he gave the King Follett sermon, and he said, "You don't know me." He ended the sermon basically with, "You don't know me. You never knew my heart. No man knows my history." His history is in the Old Testament through the blessing of Joseph. And we find that out in the Book of Mormon. So as he's translating the Book of Mormon, as he's reading Genesis and not retranslating, but adding and taking away, it becomes the inspired version, we like to call it, or the Joseph Smith translation. He sees where his lineage comes from. He sees who he is. He sees how he fits into it. And then he shares that. And it had to be very humbling. I don't think it was a process of like, wow, look how cool I am. It was probably like, oh my goodness, what a responsibility I have. What a responsibility I have. So yeah, I can't wait to continue on this journey in the Old Testament. Planning the trip to Jerusalem. We're hoping that everything is going along. We've gotten we've purchased our airfare, and we're doing some other things. So that's coming up in a while. It's not easy, and there's still some West Bank sites they're just like a must for me that are questionable, and so we'll see how it goes. But it's looking like it's coming together. So I'll be doing daily videos from the Holy Land, explaining where we are. I will be doing it all on my phone and just doing the best I can, but I think you'll really, really enjoy seeing some of these sites and reading some scriptures along with it. I'm going to try to keep them shorter so the download doesn't take and the upload doesn't take too long. Fortunately for this situation, Israel is the most social media connected country per capita in the world, and the Wi-Fi and the data is excellent through most of Israel. So I should be able to do those and then send them. So I might be, like it might be a couple a day, but they'll be shorter ones kind of thing. That's what I'm hoping to do. So God bless, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.